Given your popularity among collectors, have you ever felt pressure to create a certain kind of work?
No, I've been asked to create certain kinds of work in certain kinds of colors, and I have a sense of humor about it, and I have a good laugh. And I think a lot of that sort of I've also learned from architecture, right? So don't forget that I come from a place of, where once had clients who've asked for all sorts of things. But the wonderful thing about the art practice is that I kind of just say no.
Okay.
Yeah. It's as simple as that. So. But sometimes I think when people engage with the work and they say, look, have you thought of this or tried that? That I'm open to. But can we have this in pink or yellow? That's kind of that's I just have a laugh about it. But yeah, no.
Reflecting on your exhibitions, which one has been your favorite?
I think the ones I felt that was the most resolved in terms of what I was trying to explore at that stage was the last show of mine, On the Brink. The one that made me learn the most was actually probably the one that I thought was a not successful exhibition in terms of you were asking about, when things don't necessarily work, was probably mesodomain. So that was a show of not great work, but it really helped me think through where I wanted to go, So it was good for me in a bad way, or...
Do you feel like the exhibition was experimental in its nature?
Yeah, I think there were many conversations and dialogues and arguments that were beginning in that, but I didn't have clarity. So I think what I was doing, that show was interesting because it was like a moment of exploration, right? And I think that I would not ideally have liked to have had all those. See, I think when you have an exhibition, you're putting your work out for others to see, and for hopefully some of those things to be instigators of conversations with others. So when I felt with that particular show, it wasn't a very good show. I wasn't ready, and I shouldn't have kind of done that. But I think that's all part of kind of growing and learning. And it was good in the sense it taught me a lot. But it wasn't a good show. But the subsequent ones, I think I kind of sort of felt I was building on it. So What is the 2500 was the subsequent solo where the first sort of works of the bent wood doors and some other, so the kernels of, the seeds of sort of, what you see around there started then. And then I felt that the last show, which happened a couple of years ago, that sort of then kind of took those ideas further materially, formally. And so I felt that at that point I was in a interesting space where I felt that, yes, I was comfortable with what I was doing, but I was able to then push it also. So that I think is the good and the bad.
If you could have the viewers of your works take one message away, what would it be?
Oh, I don't want any messages sent away or anything. It's not sort of, I think if I wanted messages sent across, I'd choose different mediums of sort of, So no, I don't necessarily have messages. I hope they can take away lots of questions. That'd be a nice thing. They kind of went away maybe intrigued by different aspects of it, maybe thematically or sometimes materially, sometimes formally. That's kind of is an interesting exhibition to go to, right? When you kind of have a sense of wonder and curiosity. You go and see an exhibition, you go and see a Richard Serra, or you go and see, Donald Judd. You kind of have these moments where you kind of come back just stricken by the quality of what was created, or you go and see a Duchamp work and you kind of come back really thinking about, what sort of art means, or what's being explored there. So I think eventually it's wonder and amazement. I think that would be quite nice. Leave with questions and wonderment. So
looking back at your career so far, has there been one exhibition that has been the biggest turning point in terms of your artistic career?
No, I don't. I don't also necessarily. I think turning points kind of happen quietly, actually. They don't necessarily happen at exhibition.
Yeah.
So if I was to think about moments that kind of, where I started steering in a different direction or some new work emerged, it was never because of an exhibition. It was always in between exhibitions, actually. I think so. I think those moments happen, those moments of change happen more quietly. And I think sometimes even without one realizing them. You acknowledge it afterwards. You're like, oh my God, when I was doing that,
Yeah.
I mean, these laser drawings, for instance, happened because I had some paint that I wanted to use for building, and I was trying it out, and then I was etching, and then I thought, oh, this would be really interesting to try and see if, like, how does fire react with paint that is kind of countering the fire, right? And it was just a kind of question, and I kind of sent it, and I think the for these series of the laser works, the turning moment was me trying out something very mundane on this paper, on this piece of paint, but then Peter coming to the studio, and a conversation that led to saying, let's try this out. And I was actually taking a blowtorch at that point, and I was burning the paint because it releases a certain gas, and it sort of, was starting to bubble up. And I was kind of thinking, that's interesting, how is this happening? But then I tried laser on it, and then Peter was like saying, think about this. And so, it was for me, in terms of a lot of the works that have come out of my studio and my practice in the last 2 or 3 years, that was really an emergent moment. I still remember it. It was just lying here, this blue piece of really flimsy MDF, which I'd painted on, and we had this conversation. And so, it wasn't at a show. It was like,
Okay.
yeah. Or let's say the bent works, because I was seeing I was seeing a building, and I can't even recall a building, but it had laminated beams. So it had wood laminated beams, and basically wood was cut into really thin pieces and bent. And that formed the structure. And I was thinking, this is really interesting because it's kind of countering force in a particular way. And I came back and made a door that was about this big. At that time, first with cardboard. And I was like, is it holding? Fevicol cardboard, really, really rudimentary, but it was interesting and it held. And then I was like, then I tried it in Perspex, but then I tried it in MDF, really thin MDF, and it wasn't holding. So, there are these moments when you see things, and then you try them with different materials, and then you say, wow, you can really get objects to do things they weren't doing. So that was another moment, but not in an exhibition. It was a moment. These moments of change are not exhibition moments for me, at least.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have an artist or architect who's inspired you the most?
No, I admire a lot of people. They're fantastic works, that I've seen around the world. And so I think more than artists, maybe sometimes works, sometimes aspects of people's practice are interesting.
Who do you admire?
Who do I admire? Like, I think sculpturally, I think I just mentioned Donald Judd, Richardson. I'm kind of drawn to kind of work that I'm very drawn to minimalism and work, but my work's not like that. So, sometimes you're just drawn to I admire. But no, I don't think I want to kind of really, go into that, because I think there are fantastic works by very established artists that are interesting. And then there are others that are kind of more experimental. And then, it depends, like, each artwork tells a story, and, you're at what point you're in your life, what biennale you're walking through, which gallery you're going to. It's like there's this kind of this, so I don't think I think what I will say is that I always, wherever I go, I will seek out sort of, artworks to see and see what's happening in a particular place. And then at that moment, I may be very elated seeing, and then, I don't think I've ever kind of pursued singular artists to say, look, I want to see every work of this person.
What challenges do you face as an artist in the current market?
When you say the market, you're talking about buying and selling. So I'm not thinking about that, I think it's an important part, because I think when I sell work, I'm able to kind of make more space, make more work. But I think for me, there are attitudes of a certain kind of liberation that I had, because I've continued to practice as an architect. So, it's given me certain freedoms to not sort of necessarily think about the market that much. I think I go through phases like I'm making works that somehow sometimes resonate with people, and there are other times that they just pile up here, and as I said, like they'll either stay in storage. Sometimes I destroy them. Sometimes they get damaged. Sometimes one work the other day just collapsed because I'd hung it very badly.
Could you tell me more about that work?
Just here down in the staircase. It fell.
Okay.
And it broke. It's nice work. And now its lies broken. But I'm saying, so, I don't know about trends in the market. I wish more people would come and sort of talk about, be interested in, would talk about the artwork, which I find sometimes a bit, not that many conversation, a lot of conversation about buying and selling, but not much about like, what the practice is or anything like that. So that's kind of, I think maybe some people get hooked and then they get into it and then they dive in and want to know more. Quite often it's not like that. I don't really think too much about it, which is quite nice.
So recently you told me about an exhibition in Calcutta where a work of yours actually fell and you chose to keep that as it was. Could you tell me a little more on that?
So it was a work that was a part of an exhibition at the TRI, which is an art institute in Calcutta, and they were showing 2 or 3 of my works, and one of them was a large cluster of spheres. So people, there are different readings of it. So it's molecular in nature, it's a cloud-like in nature, and in the hanging of it at some point, some part of it was small, about a quarter of it was not correctly hung. We don't know how or what it happened, but I think about 3 or 4 days in, some cable snapped and a part of it came collapsing and it broke, and everyone got really nervous. And I thought it's interesting because I think, as I was saying, that so much of my practice is about how cities are collapsing and how they're re-emerging and how they're kind of. So I thought that it was kind of just natural for that particular work to remain kind of damaged, because in reference to what I was telling you about, like the large glass by Duchamp, this was also about sort of the artwork having a life of its own and having a story of its own. And within it was another story that it was kind of exploring, that of cities that were kind of collapsing. So the collapse kind of, for me at many levels, was kind of was resonating with me. And I thought that it was more interesting for it to remain broken than actually be restored back to its original form. So
could you add the example of when you talk about the large glass, you went into it a little more extensively, but we weren't rolling that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, there's a very famous artwork by Duchamp called The Large Glass. And while it was being transported from one place to another, it basically broke. And he decided essentially to keep the cracks in the glass with the artwork, with this idea that the artwork has a life of its own, and it has its own journeys, and it has its own scars, and I think that's where my mind went to. The first thing I thought of when I heard that it had broken, my mind went there, and I was like, and it suddenly, for me, it all made sense. Right. It wasn't only about the artwork having a life of its own, but it was the artwork was telling me 2 stories simultaneously, one of the cities and then one of its own collapse, and that was sort of, I kind of had this conversation at that point with the curator, and I said, look, I'd really like to leave it like this, and I was explaining why I felt that was important for it to be left like that, and I think there was agreement that I think there was something interesting about it. So I also like the fact that it was not about being precious about the artwork, that it has it leaves and it has its own story to tell, which is why I don't kind of like to talk about what an artwork means to me, because I think that artwork embodies within it, sculpture embodies within it several interpretations, several stories, and I thought that this kind of added a level of complexity to that narrative for that moment, But the show is still on, so it will come down in a few days, and then I'll see about what I want to do with it. But I thought it was a kind of important moment, so I left it like that, really. So,
what is the trait you most dislike in the art world?
I don't know. Probably all the gossiping that goes around, I suppose.
What goes around?
All the which is amusing, but I kind of try and stay out of it. But I don't know. The art world.
Okay.
I've not really thought about it. In a sense, I'm kind of happy to just be in my little hole and do my own little, That's where I'm the happiest, in this space, just kind of, doing my own thing.
Away from the gossip.
No, you just hear, it's just there. It's just it's there in the background, right? It's kind of funny, right? But that on a lighter note, I think, but yeah, no.
Okay. What role do you believe art should play in society today?
I think the role it's always played in society, I think,
And what is that?
To exist as a sort of, as a comment, as a mirror, as a point of question, as a zone of joy, as a place of anger, all of those things,
To evoke emotion.
intellectual curiosity, anger. So, thoughtfulness, all the things that you can imagine. And that's what it seems to have done. Also to create beauty and kind of create wonder and kind of, push people's imagination and take them into spaces and zones. So it's not just emotion, it's also, it could be fantasy. It could be kind of, as I said, from anything from anger to fantasy to joy to kind of, self-reflection, so many things.
How do you view the relationship between art and politics?
Look, I think it's for me, art is kind of very political, but I think there is this all conversations around now saying, oh, politics is all politics. But I think everything is political. Like, your existence is political. Your view that we hold is political. Cinema is political, sports is political. Everything is political,
Okay.
Because art particularly has to be political. Some aspects of art, I don't think every artist's practice has to be political, but but gender is political, also. So many things. So I think, yes, politics is central to art.
What to you is the most meaningful piece of art you ever created?
Why? Ask difficult questions. I don't know. Meaningful, you said, or I don't know. I think maybe I haven't created it yet.
Okay.
Maybe if it becomes the most meaningful, it may be the last work that one creates. So it's kind of, it's the most meaningful work. How do you go from there?
And what do you consider your greatest achievement in art?
Then I think I've stuck it out and I'm doing it and I'm enjoying it. I think the joy of it is kind of, for me, is the greatest achievement for me. So it's very personal, right? So it's selfish in so many ways, right? For me, at least, I sometimes think about it as parts of it as very selfish. So I think that to kind of have the privilege to remain this selfish for over 10 years, to make things that make you very happy, what greater kind of, achievement is that, right? So I'm saying that it's not about external achievement. It's just my own internal joy of just kind of coming and saying, wow, I get to do this every day. It's amazing, That's a great achievement for me.
Yeah. Speaking of coming in and doing this every day, what's your greatest fear when starting new work?
New works also like that. They just kind of, sometimes they creep up on you. So sometimes, there is no set, I could tell you with architecture, I could actually tell you you'd go about it with these 5 steps. And then, there'll be these followed by 10 steps. And then eventually you have a building or not. But I think with art, you think about it, as I said, sometimes it creeps up on you and then you have a work series that emerges, because some piece was lying against the wood and you had a conversation with someone and that leads to a work, and before you know it, you're kind of deep in making all of this work. And sometimes it's a bit like that sort of fear of the blank page that I think people talk about, you stare at it, but that happens less for me because, I think I'm always kind of drawing. I always have a sketchbook with me and I'm always constantly drawing. And so, no, I don't think it's never this start from this new page thing for me at all.
Okay.
I think that's also partly because of the nature of the work. It's not like I'm not a stone sculptor so I don't ever kind of stand in front of a piece of stone and say, okay, well, it emerges as little fragments that kind of, sometimes gather together, and then there are some trials, and then from there, other things emerge.
What's the longest time you spent on a certain piece?
I kind of somehow don't think of my practice in these ways, which is I'm being slow at answering your questions about favorite works and longest times and difficult moments, because at some level, it's all also what's really continuous for me. It's this kind of, this continuing moment. So that's gone on for, I could probably divide it up into zones of the work. So I could say that the current series of works that I'm doing started probably about 3 or 4 years ago.
But they all bleed into each other.
They do really bleed. Yeah, they truly do. So, this kind of sense I've never thought. And sometimes works, sometimes I see a work being many pieces, right? So some works continue on and on and on and on. So does a series become a work? I don't know. I've never kind of really thought about this idea of time and the preparation of work or the completion of a work. So I've never thought about it like this. So I just think about it in a more fluid sense, which is why difficult to identify the beginning, difficult to identify the end, difficult to kind of say how long something took sometimes.
I was going to ask you if you prefer art with a strong narrative or open to interpretation, but I feel like we know the answer.
So for me, it's very strong narrative, though.
Okay.
Personally, but for others, I want it to be open to interpretation. So for me, it's kind of like I know exactly what I'm seeing in, and I will refuse to talk about it. But I'm sort of, each work kind of, or a series of work, I know exactly what I'm thinking about it.
Okay.
And it looks abstract to others, and to me, sometimes it's just not abstract at all. I'm just like, no, this is very literal, for me. So I think both those exist.
What advice would you give to emerging artists?
Make art. That's it. Be hard on yourself, and be self-critical and make work. Well, none of the other platitudes that exist. Just work.
What's the best advice you've ever received regarding art and architecture?
Just work. Put your head down. Work.
Okay.
Find your joy in that. I think that's it.
How do you see your work contributing to the broader historical art narrative?
I don't think I've never thought about that question. So even in a fluid or in a sense, no idea.
If you could live and work in any artistic period, which one would it be?
I think the middle of the 20th century would be interesting.
Why so?
Middle of the 20th century, interesting. If I was in Asia, then it would be kind of the end of colonization and colonialism. If I was in Europe, it would be the sort of complete, huge, large, substantial destruction after a prolonged war. And so the reason I say that this is the middle of the 20th century is that both within parts of Asia, like particularly India and in Europe, there are new imaginations for futures and cities that are emerging, right? In Europe, the theories for these cities have begun at the end of the 19th century, and in bits and fits and starts, from starting with the Soviet Revolution through till the end of the Second World War, there are moments when people are trying out, testing ideas, testing new forms, and then, after the Second World War, you really get an opportunity to try out these at a larger scale. But if essentially they're kind of conversations about new beginnings. Mm. Similarly, I think in India you have Ambedkar, you have Nehru imagining new futures for new egalitarian futures for India. And so I think these would have been interesting times to think about, to practice art in. What a lot of my practice has thought about in the past has been very much about how those imaginations turned out to be very distorted and how they didn't turn out the way they were imagined and where we are now. So they're critiquing of those cycles that began probably in the 1930s and 40s. And then, I got a chance to talk in my head with myself and with some of the work about them in the early 20th century, 21st century, sorry. So I think that was definitely an interesting time.
How do you interact with other Indian contemporary artists? Is there anybody you're particularly close to?
How do I interact? Usually around alcohol. Yeah. But no, I think that there are friends. There are several friends. Mm-hmm. Those I've known from before I was making up, those that I've come across, like interact with. But I'm drawn to people who are obviously coming at it from a little bit more of an architectural kind of space, So
can you name any of them?
Seher, Sim, Aisha, Vishal, these are people who are doing kind of, come from similar backgrounds to mine. So I think what happens sometimes is their reference points become the similar. Then there are a number of people who've kind of, but yeah, I interact with them and I have very close friends who are artists, but, they're friends first. And artists next, but yeah.
And now for the rapid fire.
The slowest rapid fire.
Would you rather give up architecture for art or art for architecture?
I'm fortunate I don't have to make that choice.
If you had.
If you don't have a gun to my head, I'm not answering that question. So,
okay.
Since you don't have a gun to my head, I'm not going to answer that.
That might be the wrong thing to do.
No, look, there's a reason for it. I think that, they both play different roles. And I think that architecture keeps me engaged with, in a tiny little way, with how I changed the city in a way. The art kind of allows me to think about it or comment about it or process it. So, one without the other kind of, to me, doesn't make sense, which is why so if I don't look at it as a binary and I just look at it as one practice, then there's no choice in the matter.
Okay, your favorite collector of all time?
I just don't see the world like that,
Your favorite collector of your work?
No, never. I don't kind of, No, I don't think of favorite galleries. I don't think of favorite collectors, I think there have been fantastic collectors around the world, like who've had sort of, interesting collections that we now get to see. And a lot of them get donated to museums. And, collections are kind of, they're private domains of, people's minds. And, here there are fantastic kind of collectors here as well,
You've essentially removed all my rapid fire questions.
Yeah, because I'm kind of like, I don't really see the architecture and the art as a binary. I don't see as, I don't see the world like that. So you keep going. I'll keep saying no.
Okay.
Like, that's it. You keep going.
Best hours for creativity. Are you an early bird or a night owl?
More early bird than night owl, but like not for creativity, usually for school drop off.
Okay.
For breakfast making, for more mundane things like that, right? I think than creativity. But if on holiday, then I think because we have young kids, we're sort of early risers.
Favorite medium or material to work with?
I'm still trying to find that.
Do you prefer working in silence or with background noise?
Noise.
The most indispensable item in your studio, that's not like a paintbrush. Not a paint. Actually, wait. You don't use paintbrushes.
I use found objects and textiles. We forgot. and stainless steel buttons, and then you're getting confused.
What is the most indispensable item in your studio?
Pencil and a sketchbook. Not just studio, anywhere I go. So you'll find them like in every room, from my bedroom to the living room.
What's the most indispensable non-art related item in your studio?
A chair, I suppose. I don't like sitting on the floors.
What kind of noise?
Music.
What kind of music?
Again, you'll not find a favorite kind. So jazz, Indian classical, Led Zepp, Beatles, like old stuff, French stuff, new stuff, Hindi stuff, old music, everything. Like I literally listen to, Western classical. So music all around. Yeah.
Large-scale projects or smaller, more intimate works?
Increasingly more smaller, more intimate works.
Favorite contemporary Indian artist?
The Anita Singh. I'm just thinking like whose exhibition would I not miss ever? So
Abstraction or realism?
both. Like it depends. Great abstract or bad realist. That's not sort of
Great abstract, great realist.
then both. Great art.
Minimalism or maximalism?
Minimalism.
Do you prefer contemporary or classical art?
Contemporary.
Do you enjoy solo studio time or collaborative projects?
Solo.
Favorite gallery internationally?
First. No idea.
Favorite gallery in India?
No, I think there have been sort of, again, it totally depends on, I think that Nature Mort has great shows. Gallery Ski has great shows. Experimenter has fantastic shows. There are sort of, it's not the gallery so much as like what a show is, right? So sometimes, you go to a group show in Bikaner House and it's fantastic. And sometimes, you go to a show to a very established gallery and it's not that engaging for me. So the gallery is a vessel only, right? Then it depends on who's heading its curatorial kind of, program. So I think that it all depends on what confluence of, people, spaces and artists and curators comes together. So no favorites ever.
Then what is your dream gallery to work with in India and abroad?
One that lets me be for as much as possible, and then one that can generate an interesting conversation for me when I'm kind of feeling at 6s and 7s about like, you go through moments and you're like, you really kind of have, I have kind of, moments of like trying to figure things out. And so, a gallery that sort of has that sort of space to come in and help talk through at that time. So in a sense, someone who comes in when you need them, but really ideally just leaves me alone. Like that's my sort of,
Who is your favorite gallerist?
I don't know that many a week. And you won't get an answer out of me on that. So I also don't know many because, look, with your own gallery, you have a different kind of, you have a relationship with your own gallerist, which you never have with a gallery that it doesn't necessarily represent you, right? So I have enjoyed my interactions with Peter a lot, but I don't get an opportunity to have those kind of conversations with other gallerists. So in a sense, it's like Nature Mort is the only gallery and they are the only gallerists I've ever known. So hard. Maybe an artist who's represented by several galleries may be in a better position to answer that because I only know one.
What's your favorite art movement?
So I think that the constructivist in movement in the 20s is what I find I'm drawn to it from the 20th century.
Favorite art writer or critic?
Well, no.
A film that...
So I don't work a lot with art writers and all because I think, as I said, my vocabulary still is architectural in nature. So far I've interacted always. I feel more comfortable interacting with architectural writers and critics or teachers because, in a sense, we share a certain common reference points for my art practice and also to refer to. So my interactions have been more with architectural writers and thinkers than with pure art sort of writers.
Has a film ever inspired your work? Like, sometimes I look at this and think Inception, but that could just be me.
Yeah, no, I don't.
One artist from history you'd love to have a conversation with?
Yeah, I think Marcel Duchamp.
If you could sum up your artistic style in one word, what would it be?
Oh, artistic style or artistic what?
Your artistic style in one word.
I don't know. I have an artistic style. I guess maybe.
I think so. Like you can see work from like almost a kilometer away and think that wow, that's him.
Yeah, it's probably the found object.
Do you consider your work more intellectually rewarding or commercially rewarding?
Intellectually.
Who's your closest artist friend?
Monica, Narula, Tanita Singh.
Do you collect art?
No, not really.
What's an art project you're proud of?
I really enjoyed showing a sculpture of mine in Bombay for the Mumbai Art Week because it was, in a sense, it was a truly first public installation of large sculpture of mine. 2 sculptures.
What's your dream commission or project?
Public space. I think it would be great to have outdoor public sculptures within the city. That would be kind of what that would be great.
What's a recent exhibition that has left a strong impression on you?
I can't think of one. Sorry.
That's okay. If not an artist or an architect, what profession will you choose?
Maybe filmmaking.
A lot of artists have a way of speaking differently about their art. Is there someone you can mimic?
Okay. This is the question that was snuck in by people around here. I'm not going to mimic anyone. No. Only because I'm not very good mimicking.
No one in particular.
No. I will.
A particular style of talking.
You know what? What I will promise to do is I will practice and I will come to you and do a good imitation. How's that? Because, no point doing something half-hearted.
I have your word to it.
Yes, absolutely. So,
what work of another art of another artist has shocked you?
Look, next time you have to give me these questions in advance, then I can think about it, right? Because as I told you, I don't remember what happened yesterday. So now I'm starting to think about,
Oh, right. Where?
That it.
Okay.
So
That's insane.
I had a shocking show experience.
That's insane. Have you ever made a piece to deliberately offend?
No, in a sense that the first person I make it for is myself, right? So, I mean, I haven't yet offended myself.
Is there a project or exhibition you regret doing?
Yeah.
Which?
My second solo.
What's the craziest thing a client or gallerist has asked you to create?
No, they don't come to me for crazy. I mean, the architecture clients don't come to me for crazy. And the gallerists don't really,
They let you do your own thing.
Yeah.
What's the most unusual piece of art you've ever sold? Just something that struck out to you.
No, it's just kind of, as I said, I don't sort of see my work as sort of being particularly falling in any of these categories. So I think the whatever one has sold, I'm going back. I mean, there's some things that I don't like that have been sold, but I don't know what's unusual. I'm asking you.
Just something you don't see every day.
Like a bent door? Is that unusual? Or a burnt panel? So I mean, in some ways, like you can say a lot of my work is unusual, but
What strays from your conventional works the most?
there's no sense of conventional. Conventional is then implies that there is some middle ground from which you go extreme in one direction or another direction. I'm like, no, if that whole ground constantly shifts, then, there are all sorts of odd things happening. And I think the interesting stuff is like, the main practice in itself, I see it at being on the edge, So no, I can't think of this. The notion of usual and unusual within the practice, I can't kind of think of it like that.
Souza or Hussain?
Even in a binary, I'm not able to. Hussain.
Hussain or Azhar?
Hussain.
Now for the final question, which is not rapid fire. Where do you see yourself 10 years down the line? And what legacy do you want to leave behind?
10 years, I mean, I hope that I can make sort of works that are, I can't tell you about what I want to see in terms of that, but I think that I would really like to kind of be pushing scale a little bit more if I can. And, some large, as I was telling you, that the ideal work would be a kind of, sculpture in a city or a sculpture in a public space. And I think the ability to be able to do that at a larger scale would be really exciting for me. Where I see myself in the larger context, I don't.
Thank you so much for coming onto my show, Mr. Khosla. This has been Azan Karan from Art with Odds.
It was a pleasure.